Okay. So head count today is 12, which is not great, but then the weather has been rather erratic, so I can see why that might put people off. You'll have received the marks for your Pong homework by now, I think, in almost all cases. And that seems to have gone quite well. Most people did actually kind of got that all right. And I had also said, head count 13, yay! Oh, wait, that's unlucky. Which is the Judas among us. Anyway. So the Pong's pretty good. And I had said try and do a little bit more than the minimum if you can, just kind of for fun. And rather pleasingly, a number of you did. So a few of you went kind of beyond, the strict requirements and did some extra stuff. I was sufficiently happy with that. I think some of them are worth showing. So I'm going to do that at this little section here. So here they are, just some of your interesting Pongs, what you made. Let's start with this one. So this one, it's kind of basic. It's just got a little thing. That was the little collision glitch is my fault. So it's got the basic requirements in there, the score and stuff, and added a little dotted line, which is fine. Also added the rainbow look, which is quite nice. Just a big fill gradient, easy to do, but it adds, it adds something to it. And the other thing that was added, rather pleasingly, with a toggle, so that it can be switched off, because these things can be irritating. Sound, which might be kicking in any minute. There we go. It's fairly brutal. It's hard to get sounds to be balanced. Obviously, it's like a real professional skill to sound nice and be at the right volume and not be like super annoying like this one is. But I mean, very well done for doing it. And also extra well done for having a toggle, as you can see, because it's quite obnoxious after a while. But the point is, it was done and it's good. You can find out how to do this yourself. That you can create audio resources. One way is just like creating an image. There's like an audio constructor you can use, and you just do audio.source, and it will load the audio just like it would load an image, and then you do .play sound or something on it. Or there's another way that this particular person has done it by actually embedding an audio resource in here like this, and then calling play on this, creating an audio element and doing play on that at the appropriate point in the code somewhere. Can't remember exactly where it does it. In here, maybe when it does the paddle thing or something. I did look through this, but my head's a little bit off. There we go, we've got a sound check in here, but I think the actual playing of the sound is somewhere else. There we go. Right, it does play on the audio. That's one way of doing sound. There are others. If you just Google around, and you'll see there's a couple of ways of doing things with audio resources if you're ever wanting to try it. So that's nice. Smiley Pong. A couple of you did take the hint, which I thought I dropped rather heavily, that it would be nice to replace the ball with your smiley. Maybe some of you tried and realised it was a pain to do it, which it can be. If your smiley is really slow to draw, then you might have created problems for yourself. But this one did the job. So you're playing with the little smiley guys, and they spin and fly about, and that's exactly what I was kind of hoping to see, with a nice psychedelic background or something, having a seizure. And this works with all the infrastructure, so I can pause and single step it, so I can look at the actual rate at which things are updating and see where the spin is occurring, and see that it actually goes a little bit behind the paddle on the left, because that's how our collision works, and then it detects it and it bounces off, and at full speed you don't. You notice a little bit now that the shapes are coloured and filled in, you can kind of see it a bit, but it still looks perfectly adequate. So that's Smiley Pong. Power Up Pong. This one's sort of interesting. So didn't add a great deal here. It's just the basic submission, which is fine. You get full marks for doing the basic thing. But that little green thing over here that just appeared and went away, that was a little power up guy. They just appear randomly every so often. It should happen again. And if I just bear with me. Okay, I'm going to leave that one just now for reasons that will become apparent in a second. Just hope the one on the left will appear quickly. Otherwise, this is a little bit dull. Maybe I should just restart it. Yeah, I don't know if it's maybe not going to do it without being triggered again. So watch out for the little green thing appearing somewhere, hopefully on the left side. God damn it. Right, so the problem is the one on the right doesn't work. Oh, it did. Jesus. I swear, I tested this earlier, and the one on the right didn't always have correct collision, but the one on the left does. So you take the pick up, and it makes your bat be bigger for like some period of time, and then it shrinks. And it knows, only lets you do it once, and then it times out and lets you do it again. So it's like a very simple idea, but yeah, this little power-up's a good idea. The thing I noticed, though, was that it worked. Jesus. I don't know whether they've... So I looked through this earlier, and the power-up didn't work on the right bat. And I know why, because I found the mistake in the code. I found the bug, and I was going to explain the bug to you, which is kind of a classic bug. I did try and fix it, though. Maybe I've accidentally overwritten this with the fixed version. The point is there's a bit in here where it's doing the power-up thing, and yes. So this is good, right? It's good that this person made the effort and tried something, but I would say that the code execution is not perfect. The one thing that sticks out at me is, look, horrible copy and paste, right? It's got a bunch of stuff here for dealing with paddle 1 and the power-up, and then it's got another bunch of stuff for dealing with paddle 2 and power-up 2, and it's total copy and paste hell. What you really want to do is factor this out. This should have been like one function that gets called from 2 places. I would have done it so that, that each paddle calls... Well, it's already on the prototype, but the problem is it's been put in the update prototype, and it's been made to do it. It's made to update power-up 1 and power-up 2 explicitly. And there's definitely ways to clean that up and just have one function that does it, but you call it twice, or you definitely clean it up. Do the same things as we did with the paddle in the lecture, where you don't copy and paste, you extract things into commonality. But it's okay, it's just a small error, but it's a great example of one of the reasons why copy and paste is bad. In the course of the copy and pasting, for some reason, this thing here, CX, CY, for the detecting the first paddle, for the equivalent one for C paddle 2, anybody spot it? Yeah, CX, CX. So it's wrong. And this happens all the time. You copy and paste stuff, you change one of them, don't change the other, you make a slight mistake. And the effect that I saw was that it's doing the collision check in the wrong place, which I guess means it'll work if it's along the major diagonal, where the X's and the Y's are the same, right? But I could definitely find situations where it's working. I don't know why it's working now, but it was definitely not working. Maybe because it was generating the power-ups up here or something like that, where the X and the Y are very different, so that this bug is large enough to be a noticeable problem. So I thought it was kind of funny, because I realise now that the person who wrote it might not have realised they had a bug, because they were just getting lucky for whatever reason. I'm getting lucky here. I think, as I say, the closer you are to the major diagonal, if it generates it down here, then the fact that X and Y are transposed won't actually go wrong. But sometimes it will go wrong. God damn it! Anyway, you get the point. This is definitely a bug. And I would say that it's a bug that's a little bit harder to see, and it's, the fact that it only applies to one of the instances is kind of classic copy and paste crime. Although, even if you'd done it with one function, you could still have made the mistake, but I think you'd be more likely to spot it. So that's a little sermon about not doing copy and paste. But don't worry, but don't. Okay. Soccer Pong. This is really nice. I like what they've done here. Just, put in a background and made the ball look like a soccer ball, and this quite nice spinning behaviour as it animates, which again you can single step it to see what's going on. It just cycles through a few frames of animation. There's also like a scoring mechanism in here. I think if you get 3 hits in a row, it gives you like a bonus. It makes your bat get bigger. If you kind of get, might just happen at random at some point. I'm trying to do it and I'm talking while I'm playing and it's just confusing me. But I think there is a bonus in here that causes the paddles to change size every so often as a reward for getting 3 for a hat trick, 3 in a row, kind of a football-y, soccer. There we go. See, it got bigger for a little while, and then once you lose your 3 in a row, it goes back to the normal size. So yeah, there we go. We're seeing it now. So just a cute little bit of dynamic logic, make the game more interesting. Not hard to do. Here we go. This is a nice one. I'm glad that somebody thought of this as well. So first of all, made use of the smiley, which is nice, although didn't rotate it. There's a slight disappointment. It's nicer if you spin it, given that we put the work into doing it. But hey, look, 2 different sizes though, so that's good. So, and it functions correctly, just about. Yeah, I know. And B to add a ball, and it can just spawn new balls to, as many as you like, which is actually rather nice. And this is really good, because this is a sign of someone who's got beyond our slightly primitive state of having, gball1, gball2, horrible, ugly global variable things.
This is just an array, right?
Yeah, the solution is the right thing. Instead of having a bunch of horrible global variables for each object, you have one horrible global array, which is slightly better. So the way the balls work here, instead of ball1 and ball2, you go down the code eventually, you'll see it somewhere that there's a ball array, gballs. And what it does when it creates a ball is it just pushes a new ball onto the array. I guess it's got one of two different types here. Oh, these are the two initial ones, yeah. And there's a function in here somewhere, that's bound to the B key. So that will have to happen in the update logic. So if I look for update simulation, because that must be where it must be, in update simulation, it checks for the B key, and if so, it adds a ball, and that goes away, and it just creates one and pushes it onto the end of the array. And then, of course, you then go through your array of balls, and you update each of them so they all move. Whereas in my version of it, it's like, gball1.update, gball2.update, which is a bit crap, frankly. This is better. This is someone who's going to the next step, slightly ahead of me. So that's cool. And in the rendering, same thing. You just need to iterate through all the instances in render. And this is the way real games work. Of course, they have an entity manager, it's called, and it's basically an array or a set of arrays, and you look through them to let you do things. So you can now generalize things to have as many of them as you want, just about. All right. And trail. So there was a couple of different attempts at this. A couple of different people did trails. I just picked one of them. And it's quite a nice idea to do. So you've got the basic behavior, but it turns out that in addition to the balls moving, they remember their past position up to some length of history, and they just draw their own history. Each one drawn at a slightly different size here, so the trail, kind of shrinks with time, which is quite nice. And the way that's done is sort of what you would expect. It just means that when you're updating the ball, one of the things it does is, this is my logic where I look at the previous position. It's just part of my intro. And then what this person has done is taken the position and pushed it onto an array of previous positions that it stores, so it can remember where it's been. And then when it gets down to rendering, it iterates through the previous positions and draws them all at appropriately shrunk sizes and with alpha on them and stuff like this. It's quite nice. And there's something in the update logic to stop that array from growing to infinite length. I can't remember exactly where it is, but there is something here that kind of purges the old ones. Oh, there it is, a shift. Right? So this is how you just throw something out the back of an array in JavaScript. There's a way of doing that. You just throw something off it. So it shifts out the old ones older than 50, pushes in the new ones, and then draws them all at different sizes. Quite simple, and it adds a nice little element. Impact Pong. Here we go. So you can see here when the ball hits the paddle or indeed the boundary, you just get this little kind of echoey, bouncy thing. I think it looks really nice actually. I was surprised at how much it adds for such a relatively simple concept. It just puts so much more life into the thing, I think. And it's nice that these little bouncy things are a bit alpha'd, so they have a kind of softness to them. So that's what's going on there, and the logic for that is what I guess it has to be when the ball is doing its collision. So we go and look for the ball, and here we go, bouncing off paddles. And after it does the bounce, it's got a game board object which represents all this stuff, the scoring and the extra environment. And you tell the game board that you want to add a collision, and it eventually calls something. Down here, then add a collision, where it just takes an array of collisions and it just sticks one on the back that says, okay, I want you to create a new little collision object. And the nice thing about those collision objects is that they've got a lifespan and they just kind of expand over a few frames. So it tells it how many frames of life to have. This is creating a new object with like a limited lifespan. And then in the update routine, it runs through those things, doing what it needs to do, updating them, filtering them out, which is getting rid of the old ones. And there must be something in the render part of it that I think I went past that, didn't I? Yeah, where it iterates through them and renders them. And this is all right. It's it does the update and the render and the render, and that means that it behaves nicely when you pause it, you single step it, and it's like it'll create the bounce effect over on the right hand side there. Right, so that's it being created, and then yes, and over the period of time it expands that thing up until eventually it's time for it to fade out and die away. And just let it do one on the paddle just for completeness. There we go. So, very nice. Yeah, okay, and there's a little glow on the score when you get a hit there. So that's all rather lovely. I thought that was That's nice. So it turns out there's a lot you can do. A lot of fairly simple things you can do to augment Pong, make it a bit livelier. In fact, the story goes on. I don't need to show you all of them, although I don't have too much else to do today. This is a fairly light lecture, but you know, retro style. The sound will come on. The sounds here are a bit more muted, actually a bit more tolerable. And you know, it's just square ball, 1970s style colouring. Appeals to my nostalgic impulses. This one, just a bunch of crazy colours. So this is just like using a gradient, which means you kind of get, you know, it looks like kind of animating colour on the ball, but it's not. It's just there's a background gradient, you know, going from top to bottom on the screen as the ball moves. It just moves up and down this curtain of colour. So it's like it has a kind of animation effect, and the same thing on the bats. So again, they sort of change colour, but really they're just a window over a gradient background. Again, very quite easy to do using stuff you already know, but it adds another dimension to the thing. This one's cool. It turns out there's a thing you can do that creates quite a nice neon effect. So you can see here there's like a glow on the balls here, and even on the word Pong itself. It turns out there's a thing in Canvas somewhere, if I remember where it is, where when you draw stuff, I should have been on the paddle render, I think. Haven't got there yet. Yeah, here we go. It's shadow blur, shadow color. These are properties on the context object, and you can set these up, and it just creates this kind of bloom effect. And you know, you don't have to do any work. You just have to like realize that it's there in the API, and you get this just a nice little extra piece of magic for no cost really. This one just prettied up the graphics a little bit rather than using the primitive canvas shapes. Just you know, just put a bit more work into like a shadow on the paddles and these nested balls and stuff. Well, you know, all easy enough. This one's actually really nice. So this smoky one, it takes the trail idea, but does the thing that I like to do when I do trails and particle systems in games, and that's where I don't make the trail just be like a kind of dead copy of your previous state. If you're creating these little trail objects, you can actually do something with them. And one of the nice things to do is just add a little bit of randomness to them. So you take their velocity and you just perturb it with a little random number. This is really good if you're doing like smoke trails for like a rocket or something like that, where you see a lot of games don't do it. Actually, a lot of games the rocket leaves a trail and it's like totally linear and it looks kind of sort of not very convincing to me. But if you just take those individual elements and you add a little bit of random velocity to them and make them diffuse as they move, it's much nicer, and that's what we've got here. And this one is with a background that scrolls, which again is just turns out not a hard thing to do, and it's like, oh yeah, why not? Add a little scrolly background. So there's much you can do. God, I won't show you them all. The Firefly one's actually kind of nice though, because it has another colouring effect where the ball illuminates the bats when it gets near to them, which I have to admit is very pretty. I like that effect. Okay, but anyway, the point is there's a lot you can do, and people have done cool things. So these are all ways to make Pong a bit more exciting and interesting, to kind of maybe move towards, you know, what comes after Pong. Historically, what happened after Pong is it was the same thing. Pong had been a big success in the arcades in the early 70s, and they wanted to like do what's next. You know, so it's like, can we, you know, push Pong up a little bit and make it be something else? Well, they sort of did, and what they came up with was Breakout. How many of you know Breakout? Yeah, okay. The ball, the walls, yeah. So the history of Breakout is actually kind of interesting. It is explicitly an attempt to sort of do a sequel to Pong. So the same person, Nolan Bushnell from Atari, they thought that you could. They think Pong's a two-player game, of course, and one of the ideas was to make it a single-player game, but rather than just using AI as the opponent, there was a sort of idea of have the opponent be, you know, a whole set of bricks that you have to destroy rather than a paddle that's moving against you. And you turn it all on its side, so you put the Pong paddle at the bottom and the bricks at the top, and you have a wall-breaking game.
I think this was on the original iPod as kind of an introduction to the wheel thing.
It might have been. Actually, somebody I used to work with made a version of it for the iPhone back in the early days of apps. So it's a common choice. So they came up with Breakout as the kind of spiritual sequel to Pong. So they say it's kind of like Pong, rotated on its side with the second paddle replaced with a whole bunch of bricks, some colour added to it. That was sort of what happened. Breakout was originally developed by, I've mentioned this in the previous lecture. Does anyone remember? Does anyone remember who made Breakout? Yeah? Oh, you see, it was in lecture 1, and we all asleep during that one. It was, they're unknown guys, so I'm not surprised you haven't heard of them. It's only Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak then, yes. So it's actually, I think it's in the article here that it mentions that no one commissioned them. There we go. We've got Wozniak in there, and Jobs will be in here somewhere. Yeah, there we go. So Bushnell actually hired Steve Jobs to do it, and then Jobs kind of offloaded the actual engineering to Wozniak. And it's kind of an interesting story. The other thing that's worth mentioning about Breakout is there is no source code for Breakout. Breakout isn't a program. Breakout doesn't run on a CPU. Remember, this is the era where some games were like custom circuitry, a bit like the original Tennis for Two, where Ralph Baer just made a box of electronics that you plug into a TV. It wasn't a computer; it was an electronic gizmo. Breakout is an electronic gizmo. It's a whole bunch of specially designed chips. So it's not. There is no program. It's really interesting. And apparently, what was clever about Wozniak is he managed to cut down the number of chips that were needed to do it in a very impressive way. Way below what other people thought would be possible. Anyway, so this is what Breakout looks like, or a version of it. This subsequently, the arcade Breakout was put onto the early home consoles, like the Atari 2600. The Atari 2600 does have a computer in it. It's got a processor, so this is a program. This is software. But as I say, the very original Breakout was a piece of special hardware. But obviously, anybody who did it after that would write it in software using a processor underneath it. I'll show you this little video, which is kind of funny for a variety of reasons in the way that things from the 1970s tend to be. And yeah, I should just show it to you.
Breakout may go back a few years. Indeed, it was one of the first cartridges for the VCS to attract a wide audience of players. And no one, it seems, can resist bashing those colorful bricks out of the wall. It's fairly simple, really. All you have to do is move your paddle back and forth to intercept the path of the ball. And yet there are many people who have never scored more.
You see what happened there? How that? Yeah, it's like, you see the ball came up and it kind of took away that. Just watch it again and watch how we end up hitting this brick. The ball came,
and yet there are many people.
And it's like, well, that's a bit weird. It somehow managed to hit that one without going through the others. So why's that happened?
Wonky collision?
Yeah, same as us, wonky, just cheap collision detection. It just used the centre point of the ball to work out which brick you've hit. So the ball, we can see it's got a radius, it's got width, but the game is just treating it as if it's a point. So that point moved from being here to here, and it just said, well, where is the centre of the ball now? And it works out where the centre of the ball is and says, oh, it's at brick position, like 10 across, 2 down or something, and it takes the brick away, but it doesn't do what you might think is like the correct thing of taking these other 2 bricks as well while it's doing it. And games are full of this kind of thing, sometimes justifiably.
People who have never scored more than 400 points in this game. It's time to change that. The first thing you should know is what angles the ball can travel off the paddle. For the first 7 bounces, the ball has 6 angles it can take, depending on where you hit it.
So I'm actually not sure if he's right about this, but he's obviously claiming there's some special logic in there about the bounce angles. In practice, versions of Breakout sometimes do something a bit like this. Like our paddle in Pong, the ball just bounces off with a perfect reflection. It always comes off the way it comes on. But there are things you can do where you say if you hit it at the edge of the paddle, you maybe make it come off at a slightly different angle, and that gives you more control over the thing a little bit. And certainly many versions of Breakout do something like that, where if you hit it at the edges, it behaves a bit differently, or maybe it randomly sometimes makes it bounce at a slightly unusual angle. It's just to add variety or interest.
Watch for the different angles and count the number of bounces off the paddle. That's 4, this is 5, 6, 7, Now watch how the angle changes on that 8th bounce.
You see that it just mirrored it, came back the way it came out, which is a bit weird.
It just flipped the X, right? As well as the Y.
Yes, but I mean, but it's a you know, a slightly odd thing to do. It's not physically what you would expect, but it does it sometimes. Also, sometimes it depends on your movement. You know, like the velocity of the bat is used because it's a bit like you're kind of applying spin to the ball. So if you're moving fast, it sometimes makes it bounce in a different way.
Could it also be that the assumption was it would hit the end, then it would flip the X, but because the collision is a bit...
It could be just a fluke, yeah, that managed to get detected two different things. I don't know exactly. But I mention it to you because I'm wanting to make you think a little bit more about slightly non-standard collision responses.
9, 10. Watch how it changes again on the 12th bounce, becoming sharper. Also notice that the ball doubles its speed when it hits a block in the orange layer.
So that's true, that's what I want to show you here. So what he's saying is that once the ball gets up to this layer here, the ball will start to go twice as fast. Let's just see if that's true. Yep, they definitely got a speed boost. So if you were doing that yourself, how would you implement that? How would you do it so that when it hits a certain row, the speed goes up?
The block that you can check?
Okay, so this just was a property on the block that you can check. And if you wanted to have it be something you could do in a very fine-grained way, you could do that. But it's easy to just count rows. You know, what happens here is when the ball goes near the wall, you compute the brick coordinates that it corresponds to. So you got like the pixel coordinates are, 100, 200 or something. You divide that by the width and the height of the bricks and do some offsets and you work out the brick coordinate. So that gives you a position in this array of bricks. And obviously if the Y position is 3 or less or whatever, it means you're hitting the higher bricks and you just double the speed. But you don't do the obvious thing. The obvious thing would be that when the collision occurs, normally when your collision occurs, you would do, Y velocity times -1 to make it bounce back. What you might think you should do is do Y velocity times -2 to make it come back with twice the speed. But can someone, perhaps not you, just for a change, could suggest why that would not be the right way to do it?
It would not stay that way?
I think you're maybe getting there. The thing about if you just did like a times -2 to make it bounce back twice as fast, well, also for one thing, the angle wouldn't be quite right because you need to scale the X and the Y. But the additional problem is it would keep happening every time you hit a brick at the third layer, and it would double and it would double and it would double and it would become completely unplayable. So you can't do it that way. You need to do it with a flag. So what you do is you detect that you've hit one of those bricks, and then you just set a flag that says, okay, be twice as fast now, but don't do it again, so it doesn't go completely insane.
Try to keep the same ball in play and hammer away at one corner of the wall until you succeed in punching a hole to the top of the screen. Then just knock the ball up there and let it do the work for you. Keep your paddle in position to knock the ball right back up there again and again until you've knocked out all the blocks.
That's the ergonomic controller.
When there are only a few blocks left on screen, you'll have to move around to get a shot at them. Notice that the ball is traveling.
So this is funny because this really illustrates how dodgy the collision detection can be at times. You'll see it repeatedly. The ball should really be hitting these bricks and it's not detecting it right. It's quite farcical.
At regular speed. Since hitting the orange block will double its speed, shoot the ball at the blue block first. You'll be able to see here how a ball seemingly travels right through a block. You could drop the ball and start with a new one.
What?
Or you
Come on.
can continue hitting the ball through the block until the machine shifts the angle of the ball automatically so that the block...
What? Shoddy. So what probably happened there is that the ball moved from being here to here in one frame. It was going fast enough. So it went from not hitting the brick because it was a little bit outside on the left to not hitting it because it was a little bit outside on the top. Now we all look at it and your eye knows, hey, wait a minute, you went through it. But because it's just doing simple point-by-point checking, this is a classic problem in collision detection. Because it just did a narrow check, it managed to not really detect the impact.
Block will be destroyed. Watch out though, the next wave sets up automatically.
That's actually so bad that it might be something else as well. That my first suggestion is perfectly plausible, but it's so consistently stupid here that I wonder whether there's something else.
It could also be the brick, like where the center.
Yeah, oh, that's right. It might not be using the full position of the brick as well. It might be treating the brick as if the brick's just a point or the brick's a square rather than a full rectangle. Or they swap the X and the Y, you know, the kind of things that people do. There we go. Hey!
And since the ball will be traveling at fast speed, you'll have to move faster to keep up.
Alright, so that's what Breakout looks like. I'm just showing you that for no particular reason.
This is like a show, how to beat home video games? Like the first of the YouTube walkthrough?
Well, yeah, I mean, that might well have been some like cheesy, old TV program thing. I don't quite know where that came from. I just did a search around and found it, thought it was amusing. Okay, so that's the basic version of Breakout. Breakout itself had sequels. One was called Super Breakout. Super Breakout was software based, so this was always a program. This wasn't special electronics. So it takes the Breakout idea and adds some things to it. It actually adds making the bricks move down periodically, almost a little bit of Tetris. You know, a time component. Okay. And then into the 80s now, there was a more modern variant of Breakout that I used to play when I was a youngling called Arkanoid. And it's really nice. It just extends the idea, nicer graphics and a couple of extra facilities. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that too. Not all 30 minutes. I'll just show you a few snippets so you know what it's like. So these are power-ups that come out of some of the bricks, you know, kind of probabilistically. And this is the best one. It's got L on it. It's a laser, which is power up. So now you can shoot the bricks as well. And this guy's like me. He likes the laser so much that he then deliberately avoids the other power-ups because you only have one at a time. So he's actually trying to miss these because. And eventually, when you clear this level, you go into the next level, and it's got level design. You go into level 2. The brick layout's different, and there's some other things like these silver ones. They take 2 hits to kill, which requires you to think a little bit more about what you're doing. Got a little AI guy who just gets in the way, just an irritant. These gold bricks are indestructible, so for this one it ends up having to walk a path all the way up, zigzagging out through the quite hard. And so it goes, and then we've got like a Space Invaders themed level. Okay, so why am I showing you all these versions of Breakout, you might ask? The answer is I want you to make one. I'm going to introduce a special homework this week. I'm introducing it ahead of time. So officially this is next week's homework, but I'm giving you a heads up so you can maybe think about it. I want you to make Breakout. So I will say more about it on Monday. Like on Monday the lecture will be just about how to do various parts of Breakout, although I've already given you some clues. But as I say, by telling you now, I'm giving you the option of maybe spending some time to get started over the weekend perhaps. Now, I know you've got another homework exercise, you know, the ordinary one that's to be handed in on Monday. So it's kind of at your discretion whether you do it. But I think I'm entitled to do this insofar as, you know, this course is supposed to be like, you know, 10 or 15 hours a week of your time, mixture of lectures and homeworks. And I think the homeworks haven't really been exhausting the full time window there. So I think you should have enough hours in your day to let you maybe try and get a head start on this one. And there's a justification for doing that. And normal homework exercises, they're going to be worth about the equivalent of 4% of your total grade, but this one will be double that. Breakout's going to be worth twice as much because it's a bit harder, and I'm expecting it might require a bit more of your time to get it done, so it'll count for double. So you're going to make it, from scratch by our definition of from scratch, which means not really from scratch. It means you can't use other people's stuff, don't use external frameworks, don't steal anything, but you can build it on the top of what I've already given you with Pong, which is already a framework that's got, the time control and the pauses and the basic system. So I'll give you another variant of the very primitive Pong that you can work from to get started, and you then just elaborate on it until it becomes more like Breakout. So what do you need to do? The essential elements of Breakout are, you need to have a bat. I'll come back to it. You need to have a ball. You need to have some bricks. And then the interesting thing is, do more, right? A bit like what you saw with Pong. It's like there are definitely ways in which you can extend this. You could I don't know, I was going to say 2 bats, but actually 2 bats is a bit strange. How would you control them? That'd be odd. But multiple balls potentially. One of the things that Arkanoid's got is a power-up that causes your ball to split into 3 balls for a while, and you have to kind of juggle the 3 of them as an extra puzzle, or you have the laser power-up, or just various other bits and pieces of the type that you've been looking at today. So there's lots of things you can do to enhance the basic one. Simple stuff like just adding colour, making the graphics look nicer, maybe putting a background on. I've listed a bunch of things here that you could potentially do, that these would all count as little extensions. And the idea is that you will get half the marks for just doing the basic thing. Like if you do a very simple version of Breakout that's kind of black and white rectangles, just moving one ball, a couple of rows of bricks, the simplest version you can imagine, that'll be 50%. But what I want you to do is, on top of that, is do extra cool things. But it's at your discretion what the cool things are. But what you do is when you hand in the exercise is specify the cool things that you've done. And the idea is you'll get an extra 10% for each cool thing, up to 5. Now, what counts as a cool thing? It's a little bit subjective. But the idea is that the first couple of ones will be quite generous. So just adding colour would be worth doing, or making the graphics look a bit prettier. But as you keep going, you have to do a bit more work each time. You won't really do, if you do 5 completely trivial things, we probably won't count them all. So you have to kind of ramp up a little bit. So that's sort of the idea.
Guys.
Yeah, why not? Arkanoid's got those where there's just a little AI pest that just bounces around. And I think his main purpose, the AI guy, is that when you hit him, it makes the ball bounce, which is a way of getting you out of those situations where the ball's in a repeating cycle and you can't quite make it go where you want. The AI guy sometimes gets in the way and just knocks the ball. Just another little thing to think about or interact with. So I'll give you some quick hints just for how you should think about this if you're starting to think about it ahead of time. The wall is, of course, made of bricks. Now, remember we had that big philosophical debate about what are objects and what's the kind of, what do you decide is the boundary of one object and another object? A naive way of looking at Breakout would be say, well, each brick should be an object. Don't do it that way. Right? Don't go and create gbrick1, gbrick2, gbrick3. That'll be horrible. Don't even create a gbricks array that's full of actual brick objects, because it turns out a brick in Breakout is not really very active as a thing, at least not most of the time. The best way to think of the bricks as they're elements of a different object, and that object's the wall. So create a gwall object, and the wall object is basically a 2-dimensional array that's going to have a flag in it for at each brick position, telling it whether the brick is there or not, so that when you delete a brick, all you're doing is basically erasing an element from an array, which is a lot easier than doing the other things you'd have to do. So that's basically one of the tricks. Just remember that the wall turns out to be the correct unit of objectness here, just for practical reasons. There are some exceptions if you do things like, when you hit the brick, if you make the brick fall off the screen or something, which you could do, then at that point you'd create a falling brick object to do the effect of a brick, falling to the ground. But most of the time you don't do it that way. You just treat them as being part of that grid. But making them part of a grid also makes the collision detection a lot easier and faster, because you do this thing that I hinted at where you just take the coordinates of the ball and you basically, divide them by the width and the height of the bricks, and that almost automatically gives you the index into the array, so you know what brick it's hitting. Whereas, did somebody say? No, okay. So you do the index that way. And that's a lot better than the alternative, which is you'd have to do like a real collision detection system that would have to iterate through all 30 bricks, saying have I hit you, have I hit you, have I hit you. Really tedious, and you don't want to do it. So the array trick allows you to just instantly know which brick to worry about. Also, the brick collision doesn't have to be great. It can be like the primitive one that we saw in the video that I showed you, i.e. it's okay to treat the ball as if it's just a point and do simple point rectangle collision will be adequate for this, as in your minimum 50% version. However, if you do better than that, if you say, I'm going to make the collision more finesse than that, and you can explain what you did, that would be potentially like a cool bonus if you think you want to spend your time making the collision better. Likewise, the ball bounce behavior on the paddle. If you try and do that thing where, if the paddle's like moving to the right, you maybe impart a little bit of extra angle onto the ball. If you think you can figure out how to do it, that would be cool. So the other thing that's relevant here is, up until now we've been using GS Fiddle, which I think is very convenient. It's nice to have the code and the running it side by side. It's quite easy to work with it. But once your code gets beyond a certain length, it's a pain. You have to scroll through this big block of code, and it's just too much, right? So I think we've outgrown the limits of GS Fiddle now, and instead what you're going to have to do is take your code and actually break it up into multiple files, like you would do if you were, doing grown-up programming. But unfortunately, GS Fiddle doesn't really support that. So what you're going to have to do is use your own web space, the ugly thing. So from what I know, unless it's changed, the version I've got of that is the interface is not great, but you can go into your public HTML files and you can upload stuff. You all know how to do it. It's a little bit clunky, but it does work. I would suggest that you do your development locally, but then at some point, you maybe test that you know how to upload it to your website, and you do that when you're finished developing it. So yes, use your ugly files, and the other thing that's worth doing there is it's now logically sensible to break up your logic into different files, which makes it easier to think about it. Easier to know where you're looking for different parts of the code. The current code that I've got like in GS Fiddle, we've got those little annotation blocks. This is the ball, this is the paddle. That's fine, but what we really want is it should just be ball.js, paddle.js. That's the right way to do it. And I've actually sort of done that for you. I've taken the bare bones Pong that I used as the template for the previous exercise, and I've split it up for you just to show you the concept. So it's the rubbish Pong that doesn't have any of the nice features on it. It's just plain up and down, no scoring or anything, right? But the point is, if you do view source on it, you'll see that it's now an HTML file that includes a bunch of other files, so that the key logic is now in gkeys.js. And if I open that up, you can see that it's a very simple short file. It's just the keyboard handling logic being pulled out, and it's much nicer this way. It's easier to know what you're looking at, less clutter. The ball put into that file there, and again, so this is just like directly what you had before, but this is the kind of the organizational approach that I want you to take. So you'll have this, except you'll have stuff in here like you'll have a G wall, and where I've got Pong here, which has got the core logic of Pong. Right, this is my basic update and render simulation stuff that's quite sort of Pong specific. Take this and modify it, and you have what we call breakout.js, and it's got whatever you need to make breakout work. Okay, so do you sort of get the idea? I hope so. Yes, so it's a bit of a challenge, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to come up with a bunch of like novel things to get above the 50% minimum. So that's the rule, right? 50% for just making it sort of work, and then 10% for each cool thing. List the cool things when you make your submission. And I'm also interested in how long you spend on it, so tell me that again, just for me to get a sense as to what degree of effort's required to get these things done. Yes, so any questions about that? Okay, so as I say, I will put up the formal announcement. I'll do it as soon as I get time. In theory, it's next week's exercise, but as I say, I'm advertising ahead of time so you can think about it, start working on it. And then, as I say, the lecture on Monday will go into a bit more detail about some of the implementation things that might come up when you're trying to do it.
Maybe a slight question. So, because this is HTML, JavaScript, all that,
Yes.
do we have to keep our cool additions local to the JavaScript portion, or can we use CSS backgrounds, for example?
I suppose I'm honor bound to let you do CSS if you want, although I personally avoid it.
Yeah.
I've never liked CSS, and I don't really know it well. But if you think that's a way of getting something done,
Oh, for example, the audio file import, that was technically HTML.
yeah. I think probably the answer there is if you know what you're doing and you think CSS will enhance it, then yeah, okay. But I tend to just focus. I just do like raw JavaScript stuff when I'm doing these things. But fair point though. Okay, so I think that's all I have to say about that for now.